Hey, beautiful soul. So today's message to inspire and rewire you has to do with moving from a sense of personhood, of being a person, to a sense of presence, living your life from a place of presence and awareness. Now, what does this really mean? How can you move away from personhood? Aren't you a person? Well, not in truth. That's the illusion. So what you are, as you'll hear me talk about a lot, in truth, is consciousness. You are pure, formless awareness. And then there's the body, right? And then within kind of this body structure, there's this mind and there's this idea of personhood, right? And the reason why I say idea of personhood is because unless you're thinking about yourself as a person, unless you're, thinking about the past and your name and your occupation and what you've done and all these things about your past, or you're projecting a future of what you'll do, what you'll be, and what you like and what you dislike and all that kind of stuff, unless you're actually thinking about that, it doesn't actually exist. All there is here is a body and awareness. That's it. The person is a thought structure, and it comes into being through thought. It's actually a thought process, right? That comes alive through memories, like, oh yeah, this is my history, blah, blah, blah. This is what I'm going to do in the future. This is what I, want. This is what I need, and so forth. And it's essentially a story, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is the suffering comes in when we attach ourselves and when the consciousness that we are so completely identifies with the story of being a person that then we can be completely pulled off center. So then if something seemingly bad happens, right, the person goes into fear. And why? Because it's projecting a future of, oh, I'm not going to be okay in that future, or something happened in the past and it clings onto the idea of that past and it's regretting it, or it's feeling resentment or anger for someone who did something in the past, and that creates suffering, right? But the suffering can only exist as long as you are experiencing yourself as a person and by default taking everything personally. But there's actually another way to operate in the world, and I know we've never been taught this for the most part. I mean, anyone that comes and tells you, hey, you don't have to operate or experience yourself as a person, usually you'd think they're crazy. But the truth is, there is another way to operate in the world, and that other way is through presence. Now, what does that mean? Well, presence, it sounds mysterious, but it simply means just pure awareness, completely beyond the thinking mind that creates the story of personhood, right? And it's just here now. It's in the present moment by default. Awareness is just directly perceiving what is, without a past, without a future, and therefore without suffering by default, because suffering can only come into play if you are holding on something in the past or you're projecting something into the future. And that's where fear comes from, and guilt and pain and all those types of things, right? But in the present moment, there's just direct perceiving of what is. And the more you can be in the state of presence, which is again not a state that is based on thought, but more just a state based on being, the less you will suffer and the more joy you will experience, the more you'll perceive life as magical, the more you'll just feel peace and ease and effortlessness and so forth. And it's not a state that is inactive or passive. Whatever you need to do in the world will arise naturally, spontaneously, and with much more flow and ease. Now, it does take a lot of practice to be in a state of presence. I'm still trying to practice it every day, and a lot of times I find myself in a state of personhood. So there's nothing wrong with that. The idea is when you do notice that you're deeply identified as a person, and by default taking things personally and suffering as a result. When you notice that, you don't go, oh man, I shouldn't be, because then that's just kind of the mind doing its thing again. You're just still stuck in it. The noticing itself, if you just stay in the noticing without judgment, the noticing itself is presence. Because the person, the mind, cannot notice itself that it is identified with the mind, because identification by default means that it's, one with it. So the moment you notice, you're already out of it. And if you just stay with the noticing, you just stay with the noticing of the mind and its busyness, and it's stuck in the past and it's stuck in the future, that is presence. And there you are, just directly perceiving in this moment mind activity. And that seems like such a simple thing, but it's actually very, very powerful. What happens if you practice this way of being is that you start having more and more periods of mental quiet, and more periods of just kind of peace and ease and the spaciousness. And so for today, I'd like you, as much as you can, go through the day trying to notice without a lot of effort. Just kind of be this, almost like this still witness behind your body. If you want a technique, that's the technique you can use. Assume you are this still, formless without form witness that is kind of a little behind your body, a little behind it and above it, just watching the person. And whenever the person's having thoughts, it's watching it with zero judgment, gently, with tenderness, right? With the soft attitude of, it's okay, it's okay. And if the person gets angry, it's okay. If the first person feels, joy, it's okay. If the person's projecting in the future, it's okay. But whenever you're noticing it from that place kind of behind the body and feeling this sense of it's okay, already you are not identified as the person. Already there's more space, already there's more peace, and that is presence. So presence is not about this idea of perfection, of just being completely beyond the mind, because that's just not going to happen, and definitely not overnight. But it's the awareness of personhood without being completely identified with it. All right? And that really starts to change things in your life. This is what the idea of kind of mindfulness and things like that, where you are not in the mind. It shouldn't be called mindfulness. It's almost like mindlessness, but in a beautiful way, right? It's beyond mind, it's transcendent of mind, and it watches and witnesses without judgment. So practice that for today as much as you can, and see what experience it brings up for you, and see if you're more peaceful, if you're more loving, if you're more kind, and how it feels to be more and more in the present moment, and just witness the mind get caught up but not be affected by it, and try to come back into that witness perspective.